everybody, and welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Christina Previtt. I am one of two lead faculty for modern management of the older adult. I also teach with clinical management of the fitness athlete, so it's so funny. I'm so surprised how little I actually get them mixed up depending on where you're at in the podcast. But for the older adult division, we have 3 courses. We have our Essential Foundations and our Advanced Concepts Online that are both starting in September. And we also have our live course that we've unfortunately had to be put on pause for a really long time now. I feel like I haven't taught that course in forever because of Corona. But if you guys are looking for something to do this weekend, we have our online virtual sampler. And that is actually probably one of my favorite weekends of the entire year. One, because all the faculty usually congregate in one place. This time or this year, our place is on Zoom. But we also get to do a sampling of all of the faculty's content. So I'm going to be doing a fitness athlete modern management blended session on the comprehensive shoulder, going from the fitness athlete to Mabel. So we call from Matt to Mabel, Matt Fraser to Mabel. And I'm also going to be doing on Sunday, a presentation with Kelsey Valentine around peeing on the platform, talking about incontinence in strength-based sports. So I hope you guys, if you have nothing other things on the plate for this weekend that you consider joining, you can still sign up. Okay, so I got tagged a couple of times in the systematic review and meta-analysis that got published this week. So I thought that I would do a little bit of a review of it and talk about what it means from a clinical perspective. So this is a systematic review and meta-analysis, so a synthesis of the literature that came out from Brad Schoenfeld's group. And the main author was Ozo Gergic. I really hope I didn't pronounce that improperly, but it was called The Effects of Resistance Training on Muscle Size and Strength in Very Elderly Adults, a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. And he kind of set this up beautifully because in general, when we think about the older adult, we're thinking about 60 plus, 65 plus. And if anybody is working in the Geri PT space, especially if you're working in home health, you're working in SNF or assisted living facilities, you know that's 65 to 75 is probably a really small part of your caseload. Most people now, especially with our medical management and what we know about health and lifestyle, we're seeing most of our clients being 80 plus, 75, 80 plus. And if you get someone who's 65, you're like, wow, I have somebody really young on my caseload. So it's nice to see some of these randomized control trials that are trying to really speak to a slightly older demographic. So in that 75 plus. One thing that I will say that always drives me a little bit bananas is in research, they call 75 plus or 80 plus the oldest old. And just, I cringe on the inside. Like, why can't we just say older adults over 75? Like, why do you have to say the oldest old? That just sounds brutal. But anyways, that might just be me that's getting a little bit cringy about the semantics. But okay, so this review, it set up its rationale very well. It talked about 2 different things. So it talked about strength and performance outcomes with resistance training. And it talked about some of the muscular physiology that is going on that is driving some of these adaptations if they exist. And so there's a couple of things that we already know in the literature. And one of them is that some of the muscular physiology mechanisms that drive adaptations in younger athletes are blunted. Those responses are blunted in the older adult. And they call it anabolic resistance. And I am by no means a muscular physiologist, so I can't really get into the weeds around the different protein cascades, et cetera, et cetera. I kind of know this from a clinical perspective. And so what it's trying to say is that the amount of stimulus required to drive hypertrophic changes, so change in the cross-sectional area of muscle, is blunted with the older adult. And what they think now is happening is that some of these adaptations that are occurring are neurological or happening at the level of the motor unit. What we know happens with age is that we see a decline in the cross-sectional area of muscle, and we see a reduction in the number of motor units per muscular area. So our rate of force production goes down, which is why we see a stronger decline in power than in strength. And what is going to happen then is we have to try and figure out some of the mechanisms behind what is driving these changes in function, these changes in outcome, and some of the physiology that's going on behind a resistance training program for somebody in their 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s. And so in 1990, there was a study that was done in Italy by Fiatorn and colleagues that took individuals who were wheelchair bound in their 90s and gave them a 6-week exercise program. And it was twice a week. And I believe that they were actually still in sitting the entire time. And what they saw was this really sharp increase in the cross-sectional area of muscle, which directly contrasted any of the previous literature. But this was a single arm study, so it was kind of a pre-post design. And anytime they have tried to do any randomized control trials that had 2 arms, including a control group that wasn't exercising, the results weren't as robust, so they aren't as reproducible. And so what this systematic review tried to do was look at some of the literature and synthesize it to see if we really could get an idea of what is happening. So from a physical therapist point of view, this was a really wonderful paper. The methodology was really good. I really wish that they would have focused a little bit more on the strength outcomes. They kind of just synthesized the strength outcomes, and they really focused on the muscular physiology, which makes total sense because this is a group that focuses on muscular physiology. And so there's still definitely a need for one that's really focusing on strength outcomes. But I'll talk to you a little bit about some of their synthesized results. So what they were saying is that a lot of resistance training programs need to be at least 6 weeks in length. That was part of their inclusion criteria. Absolutely, we need a certain amount of stimulus in order to drive change, which again, from a clinical perspective can be extremely challenging because sometimes our programs of care do not allow for us to be seeing people twice a week for 6 weeks, which is why in MMOA we talk a lot about trying to create this relationship with fitness professionals who have a specific skill set in working with older adults, and why we are really encouraged when we see fitness professionals in our courses, because now we have a common language for us to speak to. But what they showed, I'm just making sure that I'm quoting this properly so I have the study up here, is that there was a difference in the cross-sectional area of the whole muscle, but there was no statistically significant difference from a muscle fiber perspective. So what it's saying is that with the resistance training program in individuals who are over 75, we're going to see a medium effect size of the actual size of the muscle, which is great. But when we're looking at some of the physiology, that cross-sectional area, we're not seeing as robust a result. And for me as a therapist, that to me, whatever is driving the change, if it's at the level of the muscle fiber, at the level of the whole muscle, that doesn't really matter to me as long as we're seeing those adaptations. What it was also showing is that there was a significant increase in strength and lower extremity function and outcomes for individuals who had participated in at least a 6-week, median length was 10-week exercise program focusing on strengthening the lower extremity, which is all great. And if you want to take a look at this study, they kind of break down the different exercise programs. And we've talked a lot on this podcast about different types of prescribing and prescription of exercise in regards to driving those adaptations in the older adult. One other thing that I wanted to mention with this study was that they didn't see a statistically significant difference in hand grip strength. And there's a couple of reasons why that's important. I posted on my Instagram a brief synthesis on grip strength. In general, hand grip strength is used as an indirect measure of overall body strength. Not only is it important for upper extremity function in regards to being able to complete ADLs and IDLs, it's a very easy way to assess strength that is able to be done at a large scale. So hand grip strength has been shown to be an indirect prognostic indicator for things like outcomes of cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. And some people have thought, well, then I just need to start working on grip strength, but what hand grip strength is an indirect measure of global body strength. And so oftentimes it's used as a marker of strength in a lot of strength training programs and a lot of research studies. What this systematic review showed was that when we were doing a lot of seated TheraX, which is what was in here, there's a lot of machine type of isokinetic, isotonic exercise programs that were included in this review, is that hand grip strength didn't improve. And that kind of makes sense to me. We know that one of the biggest markers or drivers of change is specificity and progressive overload. And if we aren't working on our grip strength, then I wouldn't necessarily expect grip strength to be significantly improved. And so this is one of the things where I would be like, well, maybe we should just be adding deadlifts into our program, because now I would be working on hand grip strength as well as lower extremity function. And you have heard us go totally on soapboxes about why it's so important for us to be teaching our older adults how to pick things up off the ground, and the way that we can modify that for every level, from a low level patient who is unfortunately confined to a wheelchair to a higher level athlete in the master's athlete category who's in their 60s. So that was kind of the brief synopsis of this review. The last thing that they had mentioned that I think was really important was around adverse events. And so whenever we're doing a research study, myself included for my PhD, one of the biggest concerns is that as soon as we try and push our older clients, that we're going to have some sort of adverse event. And they noted that one of the biggest barriers is this perceived fear of causing a cardiovascular incident with heavy resistance training. And that comes from the literature on Valsalva that shows that there is quite a sharp increase with the Valsalva maneuver, with our blood pressure being sometimes exceeding 200 millimeters of mercury. And the concern is, if you're having older adults reach that high level of blood pressure, that there might be an adverse event that happens as a consequence. And what all the literature has shown to date is that that's unfounded. And I actually haven't seen a single study, and if you see one, let me know, that has had a cardiovascular incident directly related to the exercise program, specifically strength training at any intensity. And so the adverse events that were noted in this study were muscle soreness. You know, we've talked about Dustin's bringing a person to the hospital because of delayed onset muscle soreness. Beliefs and expectations are the foundations at which outcomes are built. Justin Dunaway. But also that we've had a little bit of an exacerbation of things like underlying OA. And if you guys have been working in the JRPT space, I have done that quite a few times. And you try not to, but underlying pathologies exist. And so that might just be something that we just have to be looking out for and modifying, and why it's important to, try and see a physical therapist and get them on a program that respects the range of motion that their body has available to them, as well as the baseline level of strength. So it was nice to see another synthesis that showed that there are no high-risk adverse events that are a result of resistance training in an older adult population, especially those who are the oldest old. So it's really great to see that literature. So synthesis of this review. Number one is that a resistance training program has to be a sufficient length in order for us to be driving adaptations. That isn't really new. You can get jacked and strong at every age. So this was showing that even at 75 and above, we are seeing that these older adults are able to get stronger. They're able to put on muscle mass. It's going to be slower than an athlete. It's going to be less significant than an athlete, but especially if an older adult has experienced a significant period of time where they've gone through deconditioning, it can be extremely important from a functional perspective for them to be able to put on that little bit of muscle mass, improve that motor control, and see maintenance of the motor unit recruitment that is happening as we get older. That loss of motor units, we don't want that to happen, so that we can have a significant amount of force production in order to complete ADLs and IADLs. We are seeing that from a physiology perspective, that we're seeing a significant increase in whole body cross-sectional area, but that may not necessarily be translating at the level of the muscle fiber. And so we have a little bit more work to do there. That specificity is key, is number 4, that we need to be making sure that we are testing and retesting the objective measures that we are directly trying to improve on. So that can be outcome measures, that can be body structure function. If we're looking at the ICF model around, looking at if we're strengthening the bicep, testing the bicep. And we can't necessarily assume that our entire body is going to get stronger if we're not working on upper extremity strength. This is a plug that we should be working on upper extremity strength, and maybe including deadlifts in our exercise programs for people over the age of 75. And finally, we do not need to be worrying most of the time about significant adverse events while watching for things like exacerbation of underlying orthopedic conditions and muscle soreness, and setting those expectations that muscle soreness might occur because we are doing a strength training program where we're pushing the boundaries. But we don't need to worry that if we're working with somebody who's over the age of 75 that they're going to have some sort of cardiovascular incident, because that is not supported in the literature, that is something that will likely happen. All right, if you guys are looking for the citation, I will put it in the comments below. This study just got published this week, and they have quite a few. They included 22 studies, which is quite a bit for a systematic review, which is great to see, and they were able to get enough reduction in heterogeneity to perform a meta-analysis, which is also great from a statistical perspective. So I will put this in the comments below. I love to see that there's more and more attention being put to strong programs for the older adult over 75, though I'll probably say it as older adults over 75 and not the oldest old. All right, I hope to see you guys at the sampler this weekend. If you're interested in any of our online MMOA offerings, we are starting in September with Essential Foundations and Advanced Concepts. Note that you have to take Essential Foundations in order to take Advanced Concepts. Last thing, we have a new online resource for you. Our very own Alex Germano, who is one of the TAs for the Modern Management of the Older Adult courses, has put together a EMOM for the older adult, which is such an amazing resource. We get asked this all the time about how to take the construct of an EMOM and boil it down to different levels for the lower level adults to the 65 plus group cohort who's a community dwelling older adult, and we have that resource for you. So you can go to ptonice.com/resources and you can download that free ebook. So I hope you guys found that helpful. I'll link to that below as well. All right, guys, have a great week. Hopefully I see you this weekend, and we'll talk soon. Bye.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.